I've got a nonlinear system on the board here. You'll notice this time neither one of my equations is a linear equation. So I want you to go ahead and solve this by substitution. Just going to give you one word of caution. Notice you've got a square root there. That puts some restrictions on x, so make sure that you respect that as you work through your solution. So go ahead and pause the video. We'll work through this together in a moment. Okay, here my first step is really pretty much done for me because this equation is already solved for y. So I'm going to go ahead and just take that root x and plug that in for y. But I'm also going to make a note that because x is under the radical, it has to be bigger than or equal to 0. Because notice what happens when I plug that in for y. I get x squared plus y became the square root of x squared equals 2. I'm now squaring that. So I get x squared plus x equals 2. There's nothing in this equation that tells me that x can't be negative. But I know if y is going to equal the square root of x, that it can't be negative. Okay. So I'm going to have to make sure that if I get a negative solution to this equation, I reject it because it's not going to be valid. And I'll be able to find that because if I were to try to keep that and then take y to be the square root of that, that would give me an imaginary answer. And we're solving these systems just working in the real numbers. Okay. All right, so this is a quadratic. I'm going to just subtract over that 2 and set this equal to 0. And I think I can solve this one by factoring. Looks like that's going to be x plus 2 times an x minus 1. So either x plus 2 equals 0 or x minus 1 equals 0. This would mean x equals negative 2. Reject that because x has to be bigger than or equal to 0. And this would tell me that x is equal to 1. Now that's positive, so I'm going to keep that. Okay, and then I can plug that into the other. So y is the square root of x. That's the square root of 1, so that's 1. So it looks like we're talking about the point 1, 1 as our one and only solution. If you tried to keep this, when you plug in here, you can see you're taking the square root of a negative. And I'm not working in the complex numbers because I'm really thinking about this partly as an algebra problem, but in the real numbers. But I'm also thinking of this partly as a graphing problem. I know that this is just a circle centered at the origin whose radius would be root 2. Okay, so that the radius squared is 2. And I know what y equals the square root of x looks like. It looks something like that. So just by my familiarity with the graphs, I can see that there really ought to be just one solution. There are not two solutions to this equation. So graphing isn't necessarily part of the problem. If you're just asked to solve, you don't have to draw a picture. But it can be very helpful if you know what your graphs look like to draw the picture anyway. That way you can confirm that you get the right number of solutions and also that the solution that you got seems reasonable. Definitely I'm going to have a solution in the first quadrant. 1, 1 is in the first quadrant. Very quick to check that it makes both equations true, and it's consistent with the picture.